So we have read up to chapter 4. Now we'll continue reading chapter 4 from page 81. Your mind is anti-fragile. Tasneem, you want to read? Please go ahead.
Thank you. Your mind is anti-fragile. Is your brain the greatest antagonist in your life? Is rational fear at the core of the majority of your greatest stressors? Do you ever have the hunch that you are almost seeking out problems, creating issues where they don't exist, overreacting, overthinking, and catastrophizing? Catastrophizing. If you said yes to these, congratulations. You are self aware. You are also just like anybody else. If you feel like you are always subconsciously scanning your life, trying to identify the next thing to worry about, the next potential threat to fear, you would be right. When we fear most is what we fear most is what our minds identify as the least likely threat that we cannot control. If the threat is highly likely, we don't fear it. We respond to it. That's why most worries comes from not just identifying the one thing we cannot control, but the one small, unlikely thing we cannot control. So why do our minds need this though? So why do our minds need this though? Can't we just enjoy what we have and be grateful? To a point, absolutely. But our minds also needs adversity, and that's why it's instinctual to to keep creating problems, even if there aren't any real ones in front of us. The human mind is something called anti-fragile, which means that it actually gets better with adversity, like a rock that becomes a diamond under pressure, or an immune system that strengthens after repeated exposure to germs. The mind requires stimulation in the form of a challenge. If you deny and reject any kind of real challenge in your life, your brain will compensate by creating a problem to overcome. Except this time, there won't be any reward at the end. It will just be you battling you for the rest of your life. The cultural obsession with chasing happiness, shielding oneself from anything triggering, and the idea that life is primarily good and any challenge we face is a mistake of fate are what actually awaken us mentally. Shielding the mind from any adversity makes us more vulnerable to anxiety, panic, and chaos. Those who cannot help but create problems in their minds often do so because they have seized creative control of their existence. They move into the passenger seat thinking that life happens to them rather than being a product of their actions. Who wouldn't be afraid if that were the case? But what most people did not tell you is that adversity makes you creative. It activates a part of you that is often latent. It makes things interesting. Part of the human narrative is wanting something to overcome. The trick is keeping it in balance, choosing to exit your comfort zone and endure pain for a worthy cause, focusing on problems that are real problems in the world, like hunger or politics or whatever else. But most importantly, it is about staying engaged with what we can control in life. which is most things if you really think about it. Anti-fragile things need tension, resistance, adversity, and pain to break and transform. We get this by deeply communicating with life and being part of it rather than fearing our emotions and sitting on the sidelines. You cannot stay there forever, nor do you really want to. Embracing the grit of it all was what you were made for. Lean in and start living. New change creates adjustment shock. Of all the things that nobody tells you about life, that you might not experience instantaneous happiness after a positive life change is perhaps the most confusing. The truth about your physique is this, your psyche, sorry, the truth about your psyche is this: anything that is new, even if it is good, will feel uncomfortable until it is also familiar. Our brain works the opposite way. Two, in that whatever is familiar is what we perceive to be good and comfortable, even if those behaviors, habits, or relationships are actually toxic or destructive. Positive life events can actually trigger depressive episodes. This happens for a few reasons. First, a spike and then decline in mood or attitude can ex- exacerbate stress. Second, the expectation that a positive event will eliminate all stress and bring unprecedented happiness is a destructive one because the event rarely does that. That is why weddings, childbirth, or new job can be so incredibly stressful. On top of being a massive life change, there's also the silent assumption that this should be a wholly positive thing, and anxiety and tension should be eliminated. It is jarring to discover that it is jarring to discover this isn't the case. Overall, it comes down to the simple fact that any accomplishments, achievements, or life changes, no matter how positive, elicit change. Change elicits stress. This is particularly true for those who are already predisposed to anxiety and depression because the concept of one's comfort zone is absolutely essential to stabilizing their mood. This is also why those people can often seem overwhelming, particular, or narrow minded. Somebody else wants to read, or should I continue?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
What are the signs of adjustment shock? Adjustment shock can manifest as simply an increase in anxiety or irritability. However, it is often more complex than that. Adjustment shock often comes across as hypervigilance. If you make financial gains, your mind immediately shifts to what could potentially derail your progress. A big bill that could come up, or the loss of the job you just got. If you have a new happy relationship, you could become paranoid about infidelity or lies. Adjustment shock can bring to light unconscious attachments and beliefs. If you are someone who was raised to think that wealthy people are morally corrupt, you are going to resist having more money. If you wanted to be famous to be more loved, you are going to resist public success because famous people are often more criticized and disliked than the average person. Adjustment shock can bring feelings of intense fear. This is because when we attain something we very much care about or have worked toward for a long time, our instinct can be to shield ourselves from the potential loss of it. by putting up walls and desensitizing ourselves to the experience. We often resist most deeply the things that we want most. This is because of adjustment shock, though we don't always know that is what is causing the resistance. It is scary to receive everything we want because it forces us to shift out of a survivalist, fear based mindset and into a more stabilized one. If all we are accustomed to is doing what we need to do to survive, we are then confronted with the next phases of our self actualization. If we are no longer worried about basic survival, our minds are free to turn to the bigger questions in life. What is our purpose? Have we lived meaningfully? Are we who we want to be? We often think of a big achievements as a get out of life easier card. They rarely are that. In fact, the opposite tends to happen. They level us up, force us into greater responsibilities, to think more deeply about big issues, to question ourselves and what we previously knew to be true. Big achievements actually pressure us to become increasingly better versions of ourselves. This is a net positive for our lives, but can be just as uncomfortable as struggling was, if not more so. How do I overcome adjustment shock? When something positive happens in your life, you are going to have to adjust your mindset about other things to create alignment and a new, more accurate, and sustainable perspective. If you have anxiety about having more money, you will need to learn how to manage it better. If you have anxiety about relationships, you will need to learn to relate to others like you never have before. Your big life change is going to force you to level up in every way inimaginable, and the way to overcome the initial fear of stepping into the unknown is to familiarize yourself with it, to make it a part of you, one that you are certain you are prepared for and that you deserve. Psychic thinking is not wisdom. When we talk about psychic thinking, we are not referring to the palm reading, neon sign advertised occultist professionals you can hire to evaluate your energy and predict your future. Psychic thinking is far more insidious than that. Psychic thinking is assuming you know what somebody else is thinking or what they intend to do. It is assuming that the least likely outcome is the most viable outcome because you feel it most strongly. It is believing that you have missed out on another life, a path you did not choose, that you were possibly more meant for. It is believing that the person with whom you have the most electric connection is your most ideal life partner. Of course, the way other people see us is dynamic. Their thoughts, feelings, and intentions are largely, if not entirely, unknown to us. The least likely outcome is just that, the least likely outcome. There is no such thing as the path we could have taken, only a projection of our needs and desires onto another fantastical idea of what our lives might be. Electric connection is not soulmateship. Love and compatibility are not the same thing. Psychic thinking detaches us from reality. In place of logic, we put emotions, one that are often incorrect, unreliable, and wholly biased toward what we want to believe. Beyond being inconveniencing, psychic thinking is absolutely terrible for your mental health. Psychic thinking breeds anxiety and depression. It is not just that something scares or upsets us. It is that we believe that the thought must not be real, but predictive of future events. Instead of feeling like we are having a down day, psychic thinking makes us assume we are having a terrible life. We heard trust yourself and then began to liken ourselves to oracles that when a particularly triggering thought or feeling passes through us, it must indicate something more to come. Indeed, psychic thinking as a whole has begun taking on an entirely new light because of the popularity of pop psychology dating back to the 50s and 60s. Trust yourself, the gurus tell you. Deep down, you know the truth. This is valid. Your intestines are literally connected to the stem of your brain. The bacteria in your stomach respond to subconscious intelligent awareness faster than your mind can. This is why your gut is indeed correct or instinct. But when this advice is given to people who cannot differentiate a gut feeling from fear or from a passing thought that has no bearing on reality or their lives as a whole, it becomes a dangerous practice in which they become completely stuck and limited because they assume their random feelings are all real and then not only real but a prediction for what is to come. Yes, Mansi, you want to read?
Yeah, you can continue for a while if you want.
Yeah, go ahead, please, no problem.
Okay. Yeah. Psychic thinking is nothing more than a series of cognitive biases, the most prominent of which are the following. Confirmation. At any moment in time, your brain is inundated with stimuli. To help you process, your conscious mind is aware of about 10% of it or less. Your subconscious mind is still paying attention, logging away information you might one day need. However, what determines what makes it to that 10% of our conscious awareness has a lot to do with what we already believe. Our brains are literally working to filter out information that does not support our pre existing ideas and then to draw our attention to information that does. This means that we are subject to a confirmation bias, which is that we literally seek out and sort out stimuli that supports what we want to think. Extrapolation. Extrapolation is what we take our current circumstances and then project them out into the future. Ryan Holiday says it best, this moment is not my life, it is a moment in my life. Extrapolation makes us think that we are the sum of our past or current experiences, that whatever stressors or anxieties we are currently experiencing are ones that we will grapple with for the rest of our lives. Unable to see through the problem at hand, we assume it will never resolve itself. Unfortunately, this can become a self fulfilling prophecy. If we are so easily defeated and exhausted by the idea that we will never get over our problems, then we make it more likely that we will hang on to them instead of logically trying to resolve them for a lot more time than is necessary. Spotlighting. Everyone thinks that the world revolves around them. You are thinking about you and your own interest all day, every day. It can be challenging to forget that others are not thinking about us with such intensity. They are thinking about themselves. The spotlight effect is what happens when we imagine that our lives are performative or on display for others to consume. We remember the last two or three embarrassing things we have done and imagine that others are thinking about them actively as well. Can you recall the last two or three embarrassing things someone else did? Of course you can't, because you aren't paying attention. Spotlighting gives us the false impression that the world is all about us, when it is not. These biases plus others When combined with psychic thinking or the idea that our assumptions and feelings about the world will transpose into reality, are harmful and mostly incorrect. Instead of trying to predict what will happen next, our energy is better used when it's focused intently on the moment, the infinite now, the mystics would say, because the truth is that the past and future are illusions in the present, and all we have is the present. Instead of trying to use your intelligence to hack what's next, try to get better at where you are currently. That's what's really going to change the outcomes of your life. Logical lapses are giving you profound anxiety. Most of the anxiety you experience in life is the result in inefficient critical thinking skills. You might assume that because you are anxious, you are an overthinker. Someone who obsesses about unlikely and scary outcomes more than is reasonable. The reality is that you are an underthinker. You are missing a part of your reasoning process. Let's start at the beginning. Anxiety is normal emotion that every person experiences at some point in their lives, typically when circumstances are stressful, tense, or scary. When anxiety is chronic and begins to interfere with day to day functioning, it becomes a clinical disorder. We understand the importance of speaking about mental health with the same degree of legitimacy as physical health. However, in the same way that we'd question what someone keeps tripping over if they repeatedly sprain their ankle, a lot of anxiety is similarly circumstantial, as many illnesses are. Specifically, anxiety tends to be the result of an inability to process acutely stressful and ongoing circumstances. If we want to heal, we have to learn to process. This applies to everyone, not just those with a diagnosis. This line is powerful. If we want to heal, we need to learn to process. One of the hallmarks of anxiety is rapid thinking. Because you're focusing on some issue so deeply and for so much time, you assume that you are also thinking through the issue thoroughly and arriving at the most likely conclusion. However, the opposite is happening. You are experiencing a logical lapse. You are jumping to the worst case scenario because you aren't thinking clearly, and then you are engaging your fight or flight response because the worst case scenario makes you feel threatened. This is why you obsess about that one terrifying idea. Your body is responding as though it's an immediate threat. And until you defeat or overcome it, your body will do its job, which is to keep you in defense mode, which is really a heightened state of awareness to the enemy. What is a logical lapse? Thinking of something that you aren't afraid of, maybe something that think of something that you aren't afraid of, maybe something that other people might find scary. Maybe you aren't afraid of flying in an airplane. Many people are. Maybe you aren't afraid of being single. Many people are. Maybe you aren't afraid of commitment. Many people are. Surely you can think of at least one thing in your life that you are truly unafraid of. Why aren't you afraid of it? Because you don't have a logical lapse there. You can visualize yourself going on an airplane and successfully getting off without freaking out. You can visualize yourself being happily single or happily committed. Even if the worst were to happen, you can think a situation through in its entirety, from exposition to climax to conclusion. You know what you would do. You have a plan. When you experience a logical lapse, the climax becomes the conclusion. You imagine a situation, you figure that you would panic, and then because you're scared, you never think through the rest of the scenario. You never think about how you'd get through it, what you'd do to respond, and how you'd eventually move on with your life afterwards. If you were ever to do, just scroll this, you wouldn't be scared of it because you wouldn't think it had the power to end you. This is why exposure is the most common treatment for irrational fear. By reintroducing the stressor into your life in a safe way, you are able to re-establish a line of thinking that is healthier and calmer. Basically, you prove to yourself that you will be okay even if something scary does happen. which most of the time it does not. Either way, mental strength is not just hoping that nothing ever goes wrong, it is believing that we have the capacity to handle it if it does. Maybe you don't have the self belief yet. That's okay. It's not something you're born with, it's something you build slowly and over time. It's something you develop with practice by addressing small problems and then learning healthy coping mechanisms and effective reasoning skills. The thing is that there are millions of scary things that can happen to us in our lives. This is true for everyone. That is true for everyone. When we are hung up on one scary thing over another, it's not because it's a more imminent or likely threat. It's because we are less convinced we would be able to respond to it. To heal, we don't need to avoid it. We need to develop logic to see situations for what they are and respond appropriately to them. So often in life, our biggest anxiety comes not from what's actually happening, but how we think about what is happening. In that, we reclaim our emotional freedom and power. Yeah, anyone wants to read? Or I can continue if no one wants to read. Okay. Shall I continue?
Yes, Mansi, you go ahead, then I will read.
Okay, okay. Faulty interferences are holding you back from success. If you're familiar with body typing, you'll probably be familiar with the terms endomorph, mesomorph, and ectomorph. Though everyone actually falls somewhere within the spectrum of these, meaning that everyone has varying degrees of each, the traits you default to are typically your primary body type. If you have studied these types, you'll know that endomorphic bodies are often associated with increased fat retention. The assumption here is that these people have the worst metabolisms, but that is false. Endomorphs actually have the best metabolism of anyone. They are alive today because their ancestors adequately adapted to survive. Their metabolisms do precisely what they were intended to do: store fat for later use. Something similar happens with highly intelligent people who experience high levels of anxiety. You assume that because these people are smart, they would be able to use logic to disrupt illogical fears. Logical lapses or an inability to adequately reason often generate anxiety. However, their brains are doing exactly what they were meant to do, which is to piece together unrelated stimuli and identify potential threats. Highly intelligent people have a psychological function others do not, which is the ability to infer. They can extract meaning and understanding from things that others simply take at face value. This is why people who have extremely high IQs often struggle with basic things such as social skills or driving a car. Where others see the world as one dimensional, the highly intelligent see it as three dimensional. They think more deeply than is often necessary. This gives them their ability to create, understand, strategize, and invent. In the same way that the endomorph's excellent metabolism can work against them, so too can a highly intelligent person's brain. This is because at times they make something called faulty inferences, which are when fallacies, biases, and incorrect assumptions are made from valid evidence. What's happening in your brain when you're very anxious is that you are taking an often innocuous stimuli and extracting some kind of meaning or prediction from it. When you're scared, your brain is working in overdrive to identify the thing that can potentially hurt you and then creatively come up with ways to completely avoid that experience. The smarter you are, the better you become at this. However, the more you avoid a fear, the more intense it becomes. What's a faulty inference? A faulty inference is when you come up with a false conclusion based on valid evidence. This means that what you are seeing, experiencing, or understanding might be real, but the assumptions that you are piecing together from it are either not real or are highly unlikely. One example is a hasty generalization, which is when you make a claim about an entire group of people based on one or two experiences you have had. This is the bias at the base of a lot of racism and prejudice. Another example is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is what happens when you assume that because two things happened around the same time, they must be related even if they aren't. A false dichotomy happens when you assume that there are only two possibilities that could be valid, when in reality there are far more than you simply aren't aware of. An example of this is when your boss calls you to a private meeting and you assume you must either be getting a promotion or getting fired. A slippery slope to play off that example is another false inference in which you assume that one event will set off a series of others, even if they certainly will not. These are just some of the myriad ways your brain can, in a sense, betray you. Though it intends to keep you alert and aware, sometimes the threat becomes overinflated. Unable to decipher the difference, your body responds regardless. Okay, I'll stop here. Anyone wants to read? Or do we want to stop here? Okay, just one more part. I'll just read this and then stop. Uh, can you just scroll up? I missed the title. How how do I correct this? Correcting faulty inferencing begins with first being aware that you are doing it. In the majority of cases, once you realize that you're thinking in a false dichotomy or making a hasty generalization, you stop doing it. You understand what it is and you let it go. Training your brain to stop doing it automatically takes time. Think of your mind like a search engine that autofills your terms. If it's something you have input many times over the years, it's still going to come up for a while. You have to work on consistently adding new thoughts, opinions, and stimuli to shift what it comes up with naturally. This is not only possible, it's inevitable. What you consistently do is what you adapt to. Your brain will start to reorient your comfort zone and and eventually it will feel as natural to think logically as it once did to think dramatically. It will feel as natural to be calm as it does now to feel anxious. It takes awareness and it takes time, but it is always possible. Yeah. Are we reading further or are we stopping? Who wants to read next?
Yes, I may read. Yeah, should I go ahead or we have to stop here?
No, please continue. We'll read till 96 page.
Okay, okay. Worrying is the weakest defense system. Rumination is the birthplace of creativity. They are controlled by the same part of the brain. That is the neurological reason there is a stereotype about depressed creatives. Any artist will tell you that the toughest time in their lives inspired the most groundbreaking work. What they won't tell you, though, is that crisis is not necessary to function. Well, of course, it is not you. You are thinking. Of course, it's not you are thinking. Crisis is the worst case scenario. And yet, how many of us place ourselves in a state of panic over fear of that least likely scenario coming true? How many of us, in an effort to shield ourselves from panic, actually create a crisis out of our fear each day? We are not just masochists. We are wildly intelligent, unconsciously functioning beings. Our brains understand something. If we imagine our worst fears, we can prepare for them. If we mull them over again and again, we can feel protected in a way. If we are ready for the storm, it can't hurt us, except it can. Worrying excessively is not a malfunction. You are not of lesser character. because you can't just stop and enjoy life. Worrying is a subconscious defense mechanism. It is what we do when we care about something so much we are equally terrified that it could hurt us. So we prepare to fight for it. What is the exact opposite of your fear? That is what you want. That is what you want so much that you would go to the ends of your sanity to defend it. There is nothing wrong with you for thinking this way, but there is also nothing wrong with you for being ready to move in a new direction. The reality is that worrying does not protect us in the way that we think it might. We cannot beat fear to the finish line. Worrying sensitizes us to an infinity of negative possible outcomes. It shifts our mindset to expect, seek out, and create a worst case scenario. If a crisis were to occur, we would start panicking because our brains and bodies had been preparing for this epic war for a long time. Had we not premeditated these fears so excessively, we would not be as impacted were they to actually happen. We would see the situation for what it is and respond accordingly. That is where the nasty cycle forms. Once we worry ourselves sick over something that is totally delusional and it doesn't happen because, of course, it was never going to. We start to associate worry with safety. See, I thought this through so many times that I have avoided it. But that is not what is happening at all. Just telling someone to stop worrying and be present strengthens their impulse to be fearful because you are effectively asking them to place their guards down. Making yourself feel more vulnerable when you are already at your edge is not the answer. Instead, you have to find a different way to feel safe. Rather than spending your time rehearsing how much you would panic if such and such a situation were to come to fruition, imagine how a third party would handle it if they were in your shoes. Imagine getting to the other side of the issue, perhaps even treating it as an opportunity to create something you otherwise could not. Rather than spending your time shrinking yourself and your life out of fear of potentially confronting some kind of hardship, work on developing your self esteem and know that even if you were to fail, you would not be judged, exiled, or hated in the way you fear. Rather than spending your life trying to identify the next thing to worry about and then overcome, learn to move into a new pattern of thinking in which you recognize that you don't need to balance out the bad with the good to live a full and fair life. Stability and wholeness, health and vitality are your birthright. You are allowed to have everything you want. You are permitted to be at peace. Worrying is so primal in the way that it fulfills a deep need within us to feel as though we have conquered and thus are protected and saved. Yet at the same time, our discomfort with it is a higher aspect of ourselves, informing us that it is not necessary and in fact it is holding us back from the people we want and are meant to be. There is a better way to feed your emotional hunger, and it is not fighting yourself for your own inner peace.
So we'll
Yeah,
stop here today.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's reflect back on what we have read so far today. What connected, what stood out, anything which clarified things, anything which you didn't agree to, and even if you could relate some experiences you can also share that experience.
One of the point that related to me was that most of the time we think about the past, which is uh, which is not fair. Rather, we need to learn to process in the present. That always helps. Another was about sport lighting. That we we are afraid of getting being judged, and if we apply on ourselves how much we remember about other persons, uh, that what they did that was in an embarrassing situation, we can't remember. So same happened with us also. We should not be in such a situation, or we should not stuck ourselves to this point that other are judging us or they will remember our such embarrassing situation. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Suman, for sharing that. Anybody else?
Can I go next, Mansavi?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Sumanji, for sharing. The very first thing we struck today's reading is the question which I am holding for many, many years actually, that why when something goes really, really well, really, really good, still I'm not that particular point happy. Yeah. So this particular book addressed at the beginning of the today's reading that how we still feel stressful even if the things are going our way or feeling good. So this particular book or today's reading actually goes into that depth to make ourselves understand that why we feel in particular way. Again, another thing is that happy, unhappy, up and down, this is not going to end. So this really helps to understand that we need to set our relationship with these emotions or the thoughts which comes to us on regular basis. For that, Manselvi, I'm really thanking you. The reason is the fear, basically. Yes, for many years, like 20, 30, 40 years, we are working on this fear. We know all the definitions of fear. We have we use all the methods to get rid of it. Okay. But fear is still there. Yeah. This is what my observation. We read n number of books. But then one day, Manaselvi, you shared one paragraph from the book Big Magic, and I read it. I really love that particular paragraph. And then when I read that very first chapter of Big Magic, that actually again turning point for me, because that is what again discussed in this today's reading. That is again I found solution for myself. But yeah, you can read that chapter one. We need to set the relationship with fear. Okay, it is always constant companion with us. That is what beautifully explained in that book. And again today we discuss about that, that creativity and fear, those both things will appear at the same time, and which is I'm observing in all my daily endeavors, in business, in office, and all that. So it is always be there. So instead of fighting and resisting it and giving our power to it, we need to set relationship with it, and fear is always will be there. And that Big Magic chapter 1 will really nicely explain it. And this book is actually again kind of a Bible for me. Yeah, so Bible for me, like you need to sit with my emotions, my thinking process, and go through this particular chapter again and again just to understand. Because yeah, it takes time. That is what author explains. You need awareness. It is a practice of awareness. So yeah, that's my take today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Milanji, for sharing the creativity and fear part of it. Yes, a lot of it shows that you have gone through a lot of reflection and awareness of what happens actually, and also good to know that the other things that which are earlier shared has helped. But as I had earlier also mentioned, this book will talk to people only where they have faced certain issues, they have gone through certain events, so that brings the relativity with this book. Otherwise, maybe not everyone will be able to relate. Yeah, anyone else would like to share their thoughts, their points?
Yeah, I just want to add few things. So basically, what stood out for me today from my reading is how it's very important to process. Like I have understood this before also, but it was just a wonderful reminder. Like how processing our emotions rightly is very very important. Otherwise, even in Louis Hay's books and her teachings and so many other places, we get to know that most of our physical diseases or physical ailments are also the result of this thinking patterns that we have, or psychological. There are a lot of psychological reasons behind psychosomatic diseases and all of that, right? Like so many things. So that is one thing that stood out for me. And the other thing was this was a very different perspective, and it's a wonderful learning today, that overthinking, like how the author has beautifully put it, that how overthinking actually, where you are not overthinking but you are underthinking, where you are actually dismissing some part of the thinking process which is necessary, and that is why we are stuck in that fears and we are not able to think rationally, and that is why we are not able to think of solutions. And even in creative thinkings, in Milinji also mentioned about creativity. So even in creative thinking and all of that, it's basically what we focus on is both of the sides of our brains. Like there is a rational side and there is a creative side. So both of these needs to be equally balanced, and when we are able to fully think through them all, then we are able to process any situation rightly, and then we are able to come up with solutions and ideas also easily and effortlessly. So this is something that stood out for me today also, from the reading so far, and it was a nice reading overall. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Vansi, for sharing that. Anybody else would like to add their perspective to this? Okay, so basically, this book, much of what has been said, I think broadly we know, but the way it has been put, the way, the informative way in which this paras have been framed, I think that helps you to understand the flow is good, and you are gently you're crossing the hurdles of your mind, it seems, as it was said, that mind needs adversity to function, to grow, and to actually improve on. So I think that's a basic need of survival, that if you have a brain, then we need some challenges, and there needs to be an adversity that needs to, addressed. So the balance is how we balance is all the thing that matters there, right? And we are, naturally a bit control freaks, I would say, that we try to take control of things. So as life keeps on changing, we are transitioning from one moment to another. Uh, so somewhere we tend to stick to, this is who I am, and this is how I think life functions for me. We are not able to immediately move into another role, or another upgraded version, I would say, so easily. That needs some time, effort, and uh, it requires some kind of a change around, so that we also change. Now what happens if we don't keep pace with the change of the life demands from us? So there are certain things where our thinking process is not clear, or we are not clear, we have built some biases towards something, or we just don't seem to be skilled enough to manage the situation. So that is where I think we lag behind, and that is where the anxiety comes in. So as the author says, anxiety is nothing but inefficient critical thinking. So somewhere we have to also try to have this life skill in even better. Emotional handling is one thing, but critical thinking is somewhere imbibed into it. Due to not able to critically think, we are somewhere not able to handle emotions as well, right? I think so far, if being a NLP student and all, meaning making was very important word for me. But the author brings another perspective to it, prediction. You make a meaning and you predict what is happening in the future, right? So that prediction capability also, or the issues around it also, the author talks about. So if and in all this process that has been discussed, if we are used to certain pattern of thinking, we'll continue to do that, right? We are adapted to make certain kind of decisions. We'll continue to do that until and unless we reflect, we try to change something, and we adopt certain better strategies to work on. So that is I think the key point that was coming out from the discussion today, that maybe you are used to looking only from one angle or one perspective, right? But there are different perspective to each situation. So see how your mind works and see how you have to adapt to change to better. The example of the weight gain and the three types that they get, and of highly intelligent people, that was different, something different. I had not read so far, so it was a bit different for me today. And it just gives that we are blind to many things. We are actually we have a lot of generalizations that we carry as beliefs with us. Once in a while we will need to question them, which we are not able to do. So we are not able to take every decision or every scenario as new, as a blank page. We start with some references already there, assumptions built in, biases playing their roles here and there. And so thereby we tend to make biased and somewhere misguided decisions or interpretations, meanings. So we have to be careful and aware about this, and see how we can adjust gradually to make, because as any kind of change, the author also talks about adjustment shock, which we don't realize, but yes, gradually this stress, that discomfort shows somewhere, and we'll have to try to align it consciously by doing certain things extra. So these were for me main points that stood out today. So anyone else would like to add here anything?
So,
Okay.
since you addressed this point, yes, I just want to add one thing regarding the fat example and the intelligence example. So, as they say, sometimes our strengths becomes our weaknesses. So it's like that, and one thing what I also understand from the this point of view, uh, so our body basically stores fat, is not looked upon as good, but actually it's trying to protect us through so many of the other diseases or something that could have happened. So small things like this, like storing fat in certain areas of your body, or getting small like fevers or things like that, they are actually our body's way of responding and telling us that it needs attention, or we need to work on something, but it's actually trying to protect us through those things. Also, with this intelligence part, I have also seen people that uh, many a times people who are very intelligent, they also process through the emotions and things like that very intelligently and very rationally, and that is why they have very much difficulty in dealing with the emotions and things like that, many a times, not always, but many a times, because our mind plays with us. So this is what just came to my mind when we were reading those 2 points, and thank you for bringing them and highlighting them, Manisha.
Yeah, thanks, Mansi, for that. Anybody else would like to talk about their experience of reading this book so far and implementing anything from this book? Anything that they keep at top of their mind as awareness, so that they think better, they're able to handle situations better. Anything, if you have anything to share. Any problems you have overcome already?
Hi,
Yeah,
Maniselvi and
Radhika.
everyone. I just want to be in the listening mode nowadays. No shares, but I'm enjoying the reading and trying to incorporate whatever learnings I'm getting from these. I don't want to talk much. So that's it from me.
Okay, thanks, Deepa. Anyone else would like to add anything, or should we call it a day then?
Manasal, a quick addition. I'm using these two books in supporting reading of this book, Think Straight, which I think Sunday group they are reading that book. So I already finished that book, Think Straight. And second one is Don't Believe Whatever You Think. So these two very simple books, very small, quick read. But those two books actually helping me to understand this one, because Mountain is You, this book is actually going into the depth. And those two books actually helped me to understand this book. So I'm just suggesting to read those two books as well. It comes into the same category. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mileji, for those additions. So Think Straight is the book, and Don't
Yeah.
Believe
Don't believe whatever you think.
whatever
I
you
will share the PDFs. Yeah.
So anyone interested can pick this up and, read it in combination with what we are reading so far. Okay, then, thanks everyone for your time and reading. It was nice reading today. So we'll close the session today and we'll connect back tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.